Jaime Lannister entered the Solar with the casual swagger of a man who found every room his own. He paused just inside the door, noticing Robert seated at a heavy oak desk with the large hound Storm curled at his feet. A single lamp burned on a side table, throwing the king's broad shoulders into sharp relief. For a moment, neither man spoke. The hush carried all the tension of a coiled spring. Robert broke the silence first, his tone wary but calm. "Sir Jaime, it's not often you come to see me privately." Jaime took a few steps closer, the torchlight grazing the golden hair at his temples. "I thought it best we speak. There are matters that require your attention, your grace." Robert gestured for him to sit. Jaime crossed to a chair, though he did not take it immediately, as if reluctant to appear smaller than the king. At length, he lowered himself onto the wooden seat, one hand resting lightly on the pommel of his sword, which was sheathed at his hip. "Go on, then," Robert said, tapping his fingers on the desk. The old Robert would likely have been curt to the point of insult, but these were different times. "What's on your mind?" Jaime's green eyes flicked toward the hound before returning to the king. "We should be honest with each other. You've changed, Robert. The whole castle sees it. You're more engaged, and that has consequences for many of us." Robert let out a short huff. "I'm aware of that. This is still my realm, Jaime, though I'd nearly forgotten it myself. Now I remember. If you've got some grievance to air, do it plainly." Jaime's lips curved in a faint, humorless smile. "I never imagined the day would come when Robert Baratheon grew weary of feasts and revels. Yet here we are. Your reformation has made waves. Certain people, my father among them, are concerned." Robert folded his arms across his chest. "Concerned about what? That I'll finally hold men accountable? That the days of bribery and laziness are ending?" Jaime's gaze hardened. "Concerned that you'll turn your attention to old rumors. That you might lash out in ways that provoke another war." "Rumors," Robert repeated flatly, though they both knew precisely what was meant. "If you came here to accuse me of plotting against your family, speak it." "I came here to gauge your intentions," Jaime corrected. "I serve in the Kingsguard. My duty is to protect you, but let's not pretend we're bosom friends. The tension between us is well known. I'd rather not be caught off guard if you decide to act on certain suspicions." Robert stared at Jaime in silence for a long moment. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window shutters. Storm let out a low whine, sensing the unease in the room. Robert reached down, stroked the dog's head absently, then met Jaime's eyes. "You speak of suspicions. I won't deny I have them, but unless you've come to confess something, I'm not sure what you want from me." Jaime shrugged, his expression carefully neutral. "A fair warning. If you do anything that threatens my family, the Lannisters won't stand idle. That includes Cersei, Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. Whether or not you believe them to be your trueborn heirs, you've named them so before the realm. You'll make yourself a target if you move against them." Robert almost snarled, but he caught himself. He remembered his vow to keep his wits. "Are you threatening your king in my own castle?" A flicker of tension crossed Jaime's features. "I'm merely stating the obvious. My father is not a patient man, nor is he forgiving. I'd rather see the realm stay at peace." Robert shifted in his seat, the old anger flaring briefly in his dark eyes. "Tell Tywin that if I wanted war, I'd have done it by now. I'm no fool, Jaime. I know tearing down the very pillars of my house on a whim would ruin us all." He let out a breath, forcibly calming the storm inside him. "But I also know how precarious the truth is. Your sister, my queen, does nothing to hide her disdain these days. If she does something reckless, I'll have no choice but to respond." Jaime rose to his feet, every motion controlled. He placed a gloved hand on the back of the chair, eyes scanning Robert's face as though searching for a weakness. "Then we understand each other," he said at last. "No one wants another bloodbath like we had during the rebellion. If you can keep your temper and my father can keep his pride, perhaps this realm will remain intact." Robert gave a cold smile. That's all I've ever wanted. For the realm to stand, strong and united. If you truly want peace, Jaime, keep your sister in check." Jaime dipped his head, an acknowledgement rather than a bow. Then he turned and strode out, boots clacking on the stone floor. The door closed behind him with a resounding thud that left Robert in heavy silence. Storm whined again, sensing his master's turmoil. For a time, Robert simply sat there, sorting through the conversation. Part of him wanted to roar, to smash the furniture with his war hammer. Another part, the steadier part he'd worked so hard to nurture, told him that this was simply the shape of politics. He had known all along that confronting the Lannister question would be a delicate dance, not a straightforward fight. Still, it angered him that Jaime would come to warn him in such a manner. Let the Kingslayer remember that Robert Baratheon was no longer an indifferent drunk. He was a king who would not be bullied. Eventually, Robert stood, the tension in his muscles making him feel older than his years. He decided he needed air. Taking Storm with him, he made his way through the winding corridors, descending into a courtyard where crisp winter winds ruffled the banners. As he walked, guards and servants parted before him. He spoke to no one, not until he reached a spot near the castle's outer walls where the courtyard opened to a view of the sea. There he paused, leaning on a low stone parapet. The sun was dipping westward, painting the horizon in streaks of gold and crimson. Storm sat at his feet, tail thumping against the stones. Behind him, footsteps approached, light yet purposeful. He turned to see Ned Stark, wearing a thick wool cloak over his plain tunic, approach with a measured expression. "I heard Ser Jaime paid you a visit," Ned said softly, stopping a pace away. Robert gave a wry snort. Word travels fast. In King's Landing, it always does. Ned stepped to the parapet, hands clasped behind his back. "I take it the conversation was tense. He came to warn me off any rash move against the Lannisters, essentially reminding me that Tywin's shadow looms large." Robert shook his head. "As if I needed the reminder." Ned's face was grave. "We'll have to tread carefully. Tywin has men in the city, and I wouldn't doubt he has spies in the Red Keep itself." "Undoubtedly," Robert agreed. His eyes scanned the distant waters, where a single ship sailed out beyond the break. "I won't strike the first blow, Ned, but I won't ignore a blow aimed at me either." Ned nodded, solemn. "Understood. Perhaps we can set a course that averts open conflict. House Lannister still provides us valuable support, at least on paper." Robert's jaw twitched, remembering the debts the crown owed to the Lannisters as well. "Yes, well, support can be withdrawn at any moment. Still, I'd rather keep the gold flowing than see my people starve because Tywin wants to test me." He stood upright, letting the cold wind whip at his cloak. "Any updates from your watchers in the city?" Ned hesitated, then answered, "Tensions are rising in Flea Bottom. Some say the price of bread is too high, and they blame the crown. But we've had good harvests from the Reach. The supply is steady. Someone must be inflating prices on purpose." Robert scowled. "Greedy merchants, no doubt. Bring them to heel. If the small folk starve, the city will turn on us, and we can't afford that." "We'll investigate," Ned said. "I'll dispatch the gold cloaks to keep an eye on the markets. We can force the price down if necessary." A silence fell, broken only by the hiss of the wind and the distant cry of gulls. Robert stared at the sea, remembering battles fought, loves lost, and the uncertain future of this kingdom. The Iron Throne loomed in his mind, a seat of power and peril both. Had it been worth all the bloodshed, all the heartbreak? At length, Ned laid a hand on Robert's shoulder. "We're doing better than we were. Don't lose heart. Just keep to the path." Robert glanced at his old friend, a small, tired smile tugging at his mouth. "I won't lose heart, Ned. I gave up my wine. I can give up my doubts, too, if that's what it takes." Ned patted his shoulder once, then turned to go. "I'll see to the matter in the markets, and I'll keep a watchful eye on Ser Jaime." After Ned left, Robert lingered by the parapet, gazing toward the city walls where the lights of the houses in King's Landing were beginning to flicker on, one by one. From this distance, the city looked almost peaceful. That peace was fragile, he knew, but it was worth preserving. Taking a deep breath of the cold air, he reminded himself he had endured the worst of his personal storm. He would endure the political storms to come, too. He resumed his routines in the days that followed. At dawn, he rose to spar in the yard. His body was more responsive, stronger than it had been in years, but age and the old softness still clung to him. He could no longer match the speed of young knights who had trained daily their entire lives. What he had instead was raw power, the same that had shattered the breastplate of Rhaegar Targaryen on the trident. Though that moment had become legend, the memory of it was more complicated for Robert, equal parts triumph and sorrow. Still, it reminded him that strength, when tempered by resolve, could achieve the impossible. Ser Meryn Trant, as Barristan had warned, was sloppy in the yard. Robert knocked him flat more than once, to the cheers of onlookers. Yet each time, Robert extended a hand to help the Kingsguard knight up, instructing him on footwork and stance like a trainer with a novice. The message was clear. The king demanded competence in his protectors. Meryn, red-faced, mumbled acceptance of each lesson. The man's pride stung, but Robert found satisfaction in knowing that even a man wearing the white cloak could not coast on complacency. Beyond the yard, Robert focused on governance. With Ned Stark as hand, they tackled a host of issues. Merchant price gouging in the city, the threat of ironborn raids along the coast, and the crown's efforts to restructure its debts. Some lords complained about new taxes or the enforcement of old ones, but Robert pushed back on their grumbles. He told them plainly that a kingdom without coin was a kingdom doomed to crumble, and that any unscrupulous lord caught lining his pockets at the expense of the crown would face the king's justice. Though many lords still whispered behind his back, none dared challenge him openly. The transformation in Robert's demeanor held them at bay. Of course, no amount of vigilance could stop every plot. Varys, sliding in and out of council chambers like a shadow, brought word of hush-hush meetings between certain disgruntled nobles. Some whispered about the Targaryen girl across the sea, pondering whether she might be a figure to rally around if Robert's new discipline threatened their own ambitions. Others grumbled about the increased presence of the gold cloaks on trade routes, complaining of harassment. Robert told Varys to keep listening, to let him know the moment any talk became more than words. He refused to be goaded into punishing men for idle talk alone, but if they acted against the crown, he would not hesitate to strike. On a crisp afternoon, Robert decided to carry out the city progress he'd mentioned. It was partly to check on the bread prices, partly to reassure the people that their king cared about their well-being. He donned a simpler, though still regal, cloak, bearing the stag sigil without excessive ornamentation. Barristan Selmy accompanied him, along with a small contingent of the city watch, just enough to keep order. Ned was busy with financial matters, so Robert rode out without him, taking only a handful of knights. They started at the bustling fish market near the river gate, where vendors hawked their catches from the Blackwater rush. The smell of brine and raw fish mingled with sweat and mud. Robert dismounted, telling his guards to keep a respectful distance. The market-goers gaped at the sight of their king walking among them without a grand procession. Some dropped to their knees. Others simply stared in wide-eyed shock. Robert approached a fishmonger who looked half terrified at the idea of speaking to him. "How fares your trade today?" Robert asked, scanning the fish laid out on wooden boards. "Prices fair? Or is someone pinching you for extra coin?" The fishmonger trembled, but answered truthfully. "It's, better than before, your grace. We had trouble with some of the city taxes, but, your men have eased up in the past month. I can sell my catch without paying so many bribes." He glanced nervously at the watchman. "Begging your pardon, I mean no insult." Robert nodded, satisfied. "That's what I want to hear. If any official demands bribes, report it to the captain of the city watch or send a raven to the keep." "Understood." The fishmonger bobbed his head. "Yes, your grace. Thank you." Robert moved on, weaving among the stalls. Whispers followed him, some in awe, others uncertain. People pushed forward to get a better look, but the watchman held them back just enough to keep Robert from being overwhelmed. He paused to sample a bit of fresh bread from a baker's stall, tasting it thoughtfully. Not stale, but the cost might be out of reach for the poorest. He asked the baker how much a loaf sold for. The baker answered with a price that made Robert's brow crease. It was high, too high for comfort. "Why so costly?" Robert asked, frowning. "We've had strong harvests from the reach." The baker stammered, clearly not wanting to anger the king. "The cost of flour rose, your grace. I was told the crown was raising taxes on shipments into the city. Forgive me if that's not true. I only know what the suppliers say." Robert's frown deepened. "We did raise tariffs on luxury goods, but basic staples like grain should remain at a reasonable rate." "Which supplier told you otherwise?" The baker named a pair of warehouse owners in the city. Robert tucked the names into his memory. It seemed someone was twisting the new tariff structure to their own advantage. He turned to Baristan, who stood at his elbow. "Have the city watch look into it. If they're inflating prices for profit, we'll put a stop to it." Baristan dipped his head in acknowledgement. "Yes, your grace." As they progressed through the city, Robert continued to speak with common folk. He listened to their complaints, their praises, their concerns about the coming winter. Some asked for direct aid, coin, or food for a sick child. Though Robert could not solve every woe on the spot, he offered what help he could, instructing the watch to escort certain families to the Red Keep for immediate assistance. A few cynics might have seen it as mere show, but Robert did it sincerely. He had once been a man of the people, leading armies in battle, feasting in their halls. He refused to let the crown separate him from their reality again. When the sun dipped low, he returned to the Red Keep, weary but gratified. He called a meeting with Ned, Baristan, and the captain of the city watch that very evening. The matter of inflated bread prices came first. Ned perused the details, lips pressed thin as he examined the flow of goods into the city. The watch captain reported rumors that certain warehouse owners had formed a small cartel, hoarding flour to drive up demand. "We can break their hold easily enough," Ned said, leaning over a map of the city's dockyards. "Confiscate what they're hoarding, pay them a fair price for it if necessary, then distribute it to the bakers at a reasonable rate." Robert stroked his beard, thinking, "Do it. I won't have my people starve because a handful of men want to line their purses. If they resist, show them the inside of a dungeon." Baristan nodded solemnly, while the watch captain swallowed, glancing at Ned. "I'll see it done, my lords," the captain said. "But we should be prepared for protests from the Merchants' Guild." "Let them protest," Robert growled. "They'll find the king is not so easily swayed by coin these days." With that, the plan was set in motion. Over the following week, the city watch raided the suspect warehouses, uncovering hidden stocks of flour and grain. The merchants blustered and threatened to petition the crown. They were shocked to realize they were, in fact, petitioning the crown, and the crown was already there, seizing their goods. Robert's stance was firm. The city would pay them a fair price for what they had, but if they tried to continue their hoarding scheme or lied about their stock, they'd face severe penalties. Ned handled the administrative details, ensuring the confiscation was legally justified, while the watch escorted the shipments to the city's bakers and granaries. The small folk noticed the difference almost immediately. Bread prices dropped from exorbitant to merely steep, which was still a hardship, but one far less dire. Whispers began circulating. The king had intervened personally to ensure they could eat. Perhaps King Robert was not just a distant figure, lost in his own vices. Perhaps he cared. Such talk pleased Robert less because it bolstered his image than because it reminded him why he'd sought the throne in the first place, to protect the realm's people. Yet not everyone rejoiced. Merchant factions in King's Landing fumed, muttering that the king's heavy hand would ruin the spirit of enterprise. Tywin Lannister's name surfaced again. Some whispered that at least with Lannister gold in play, they wouldn't risk direct expropriation. Others grumbled that Ned Stark, a man from the north, had no business meddling in the capital's commerce. A handful of petty lords who had grown wealthy off shady deals found themselves facing new scrutiny. The atmosphere in certain corners of the city grew tense, but Robert did not back down. If anything, he pressed harder, determined to show that the rule of law, not the rule of bribes, would dominate his reign. In the midst of all this, Queen Cersei stayed quiet publicly, yet behind closed doors she was far from idle. She kept her own circle of confidants, drawing in sycophants and Lannister loyalists. Robert's spies, though never as deft as Varys's, reported that she held frequent salons in her private chambers, during which she complained bitterly about the king's newfound tyranny. She made pointed remarks about how Robert was squandering the crown's alliances. Some said she was encouraging certain disgruntled nobles to band together. Rumor also placed Jaime at her side more often than not, though neither sibling had made an overt move beyond that charged conversation in Robert's solar. Robert refused to confront her directly, yet he had bigger matters to tackle, and an open clash with Cersei risked unraveling everything he'd worked for. If the day came when her plotting became too blatant or threatened the realm outright, he would act. Until then, he kept a close watch. Whenever they crossed paths in public, they wore masks of polite civility, though everyone in the court felt the ice between them. As winter's chill deepened, Robert received a raven from the Night's Watch. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont wrote that the watch was holding firm, but supplies were tight, and there were worrying signs north of the wall, reports of wildling activity and talk of more ominous threats that the southern lords dismissed as fables. Ned, reading the letter, urged Robert to send additional aid. Robert agreed without hesitation. He ordered shipments of food, warm clothing, and weapons. Some at court grumbled that these resources could be better used in King's Landing, but Robert would not be swayed. The North was part of his kingdom too. Let the men in black know that their king had not forgotten them. Shortly after, another raven arrived, bearing tidings from across the sea. Nothing confirmed, only rumors that Daenerys Targaryen had aligned with a powerful call in the Dothraki Sea. Some whispered she had eggs that might hatch into dragons, though that part sounded like a children's story. Even so, Robert felt a stir of unease. The Targaryen line was supposed to have been extinguished save for the exiles, but if she gained a strong following among the Horse Lords, it could spell trouble for Westeros. Once, Robert's reaction would have been immediate fury, demanding her head on a platter. Now, he held back, wanting more concrete information. He summoned Varys to the small council chamber, a sparsely decorated room lined with tall windows that let in the winter sunlight. Only Ned was present to witness their exchange. Robert tapped a finger on the table as Varys slid in with his usual soft-footed grace, hands folded in his sleeves. "You have news of the Targaryen girl?" Robert asked, dispensing with pleasantries. Varys's face was unreadable. "The whispers are many and varied, Your Grace. Some say she travels with a Khalasar. Others claim she's taken refuge in Karth. Still others insist she's with child, though I have not confirmed this." Ned's eyes flicked to Robert, concern evident. Robert blew out a breath. "And the rumors of dragons?" he asked, half in mockery, half in genuine worry. Varys spread his hands in a graceful shrug. "I have heard such tales, yes, but we both know how rumors can grow into legends in the free cities. Until there is undeniable proof, I treat such talk with caution." Robert rubbed the bridge of his nose. He could feel the old anger twitching beneath his skin, but he forced it down. "Keep me informed. If she truly has an army or 7 help us, dragons, we'll need to prepare." Varys inclined his head. "Of course, Your Grace. In the meantime, might I suggest increasing our naval patrols? Dothraki do not fare well on water, but if they find other means to cross, we should be ready." Robert nodded. "Yes, do it. Strengthen the fleet. Keep an eye on shipping routes. Any foreigners from Essos bearing signs of Dothraki or Targaryen allegiance should be reported at once." With that, Varys glided away, leaving Robert and Ned alone. A strained silence settled over them, broken only when Ned exhaled, his breath visible in the cool air. "What do you truly make of the rumor, Robert? Could the Targaryen girl muster an army capable of threatening Westeros?" Robert leaned back in his chair, letting his gaze wander to a window that overlooked the yard. The Dothraki are fearsome, but they fear the sea. Still, if she's cunning enough, she might find allies to bring her across. The Iron Islands, perhaps, or mercenaries with enough ships. I can't dismiss the possibility. Ned nodded thoughtfully. If she sets foot on Westerosi soil with a large khalasar, the small folk could suffer greatly before we can rally our armies. I know, Robert said, voice grim. Once I would have ordered assassins to track her down. You remember how I raged about that. But maybe we should not be so quick to kill a girl overseas based on rumors. He sighed. We'll watch. If she becomes a true threat, we'll act. But I won't tarnish what we've rebuilt on the chance that she might attack. Ned's eyes warmed with approval. A more measured approach, though it carries risks. Let us hope the realm is strong enough to weather whatever comes. Robert turned his attention back to the duties at hand. If Daenerys Targaryen came, she would face a united kingdom, with a king who was not shy about mustering his forces. That, at least, was what Robert told himself. For now, though, the storms were mostly internal. Plots in the capital, quiet unrest among the lords, and the delicate dance with House Lannister. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of administrative tasks. The confiscated grain found its way to the markets, bringing some relief to the small folk. Barristan Selmy made strides in retraining the Kingsguard, drilling them to uphold the high standards of their office. Littlefinger continued to manage finances, occasionally butting heads with Ned over moral concerns. Stannis, from Dragonstone, sent curt reports about the royal fleet, ensuring Robert that he maintained vigilance at sea. Renly played the courtier in King's Landing, charming lords and ladies, sometimes overshadowed by his brother's new assertiveness. Cersei remained in the background, hosting her private gatherings, wearing a pleasant mask in public. One cold morning, Robert decided to ride into the countryside beyond the city to inspect the farmland and outlying villages. Ned accompanied him, as did a modest troop of guards. The crisp winter air bit at their cheeks, but Robert found the experience invigorating. They rode through rolling hills patched with winter wheat, through hamlets where villagers stood outside to bow or wave. It was a different perspective than the city streets. Here, the realm's backbone toiled, tending the land that fed them all. At midday, they halted near a small inn by the Rosby Road to water the horses. The innkeeper, a stout woman with ruddy cheeks, bustled out, nearly dropping her apron in shock at the sight of the king himself dismounting at her doorstep. Robert disarmed her with a friendly grin, asking only for a table by the hearth and some bowls of hot stew for the road-weary travelers. The woman curtsied so deeply it looked as though she might topple over. As Robert and Ned sat at a rough-hewn table inside, the small group of guards remained alert. The inn was modest but clean, the fire crackling on a wide stone hearth that banished the chill from the air. Robert rested his elbows on the table, leaning close to Ned in conversation. The two men could almost have been mistaken for old friends on a casual outing, rather than the king and the hand of the king. Midway through their meal, a traveler at a nearby table stood to approach them, an older man with lines of hardship etched into his face. He wore dusty riding leathers and had a northern look about him, though his accent, when he spoke, was more Riverlands than North. He bowed awkwardly, clearing his throat. "Beg pardon, your grace, Lord Stark," he began. "I don't mean to intrude, but I've a matter that might be worthy of your attention." Ned glanced at Robert, who nodded. "Speak your mind," Robert said, straightening with interest. The man wrung his hands together. "I'm a messenger by trade. I carry letters for various lords and merchants across the realm. Few weeks back I was in the Vale. Heard talk that some lords there are unhappy with your new measures, something about tax enforcement. Rumors said they might meet with men who still hold a torch for the Targaryen cause." Robert narrowed his eyes. "In the Vale? That's surprising. Lisa Arryn is no friend to the Targaryens, as far as I know. But the Vale has always had pockets of dissent." The man swallowed. "Aye, that's what I heard. They didn't speak of open treason, mind, but they were testing the waters, so to speak. Wondering if a strong Targaryen returning might break your hold on the Iron Throne." Ned's voice was cool as he asked, "And do you have names for us?" The man shook his head regretfully. "I'm sorry, my lord. I only overheard scraps while delivering letters to a certain minor knight's keep. I know they mentioned the falcon's shadow. Some coded phrase, maybe. Could mean some lords want to hide their intentions under the banner of House Aaron, though I doubt the Lady Regent would permit it openly." Robert steepled his fingers. "You did well to bring this to our attention. What's your name?" "Jason, your grace." "Well, Jason, finish your meal, and see my guard on the way out. They'll take your details, perhaps by the letters in your satchel if they hold any clues. You'll be compensated for your trouble." Jason's eyes lit with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, your grace, and the gods bless you, Lord Stark." With another bow, the man returned to his table. Ned looked at Robert, brows knitted. These rumors of Targaryen sympathizers, they grow more frequent. Even if the girl herself remains across the sea, some discontented souls see her as a symbol. Robert's mouth thinned to a grim line. Symbols can be powerful. People who chafed under my drunken rule might believe any alternative is better. Even a Targaryen will need to watch the Vale closely. He paused, tapping his spoon against the edge of his bowl. "Lisa Aaron, she's flighty, but I doubt she'd actively conspire against me. More likely, she's just letting her lords do as they please. But if any sign of open treason emerges, we'll act. I will not let this realm slip back into civil war." Ned inclined his head. "Agreed. We'll send some discreet messages to the Eyrie, perhaps station a few men there under the pretense of assisting with winter preparations." Robert smirked. "Aye, that's wise. Let them see we're paying attention, but not so many that we appear to be invading. The last thing we need is Lisa panicking." They finished their meal, thanked the innkeeper, and rode on, the cold wind biting at their faces. News of potential dissent in the Vale weighed on Robert's mind. It seemed the stronger he made the crown, the more corners of the realm sprouted seeds of rebellion. Yet he refused to return to the days when he would bury such doubts in flagons of wine. Action was needed, decisive yet measured. Upon returning to King's Landing, Robert lost no time. He wrote letters to Lisa Aaron, couched in friendly tones, inquiring about the Vale's readiness for winter, the strength of their garrisons, and whether she required any additional aid. He also wrote to several knights in the Vale he considered loyal to him personally, men who had fought beside him in the rebellion. He asked them, in subtle terms, to keep an ear to the ground for any talk of Targaryen support. A few gold cloaks, carefully chosen, were dispatched with these letters, giving them plausible reasons to travel into Vale territory. Meanwhile, the situation with the bread prices continued to stabilize in King's Landing. The small folk were grateful, though some merchants grew resentful of what they saw as royal interference. Robert could live with that resentment. It was better than letting commoners starve. With Ned's help, he drafted new guidelines to prevent future price fixing, empowering local reeves to investigate suspicious hoarding of basic staples. One evening, as Robert was finishing a supper of venison stew in his solar, Ned arrived with a letter in hand, looking unusually grave. Robert set aside his bowl and wiped his mouth on a napkin, motioning for Ned to speak. "It's from Riverrun," Ned said quietly. "Lord Hoster Tully is gravely ill. His maesters say he may not last the winter. Caitlin is concerned." Robert's expression softened. Lord Hoster Tully had been a stalwart ally during the rebellion, father to Caitlin Stark, and to Lisa Aaron as well. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "I remember him as a strong man, always proud." Ned nodded, eyes distant. "Aye, Kat wants to go to him. She plans to leave soon." Robert understood the pull of family. "Then she should go. And if you wish to accompany her, Ned, do so. You've served me faithfully all this time. Your father-in-law is an important man, and I'd not deny you a chance to see him in his final days." Ned exhaled. "Thank you, Robert. But my duties here." Robert waved a hand, dismissing the objection. "We'll manage. Take as many weeks as you need. If trouble arises, I'll send word. The city won't crumble because you see to your family. We're stronger now than we were." A flicker of relief crossed Ned's face. "I'll stay until Kat is ready to depart. Then I'll ride with her to Riverrun. Perhaps the journey won't be too taxing for her. Winter roads can be treacherous." Robert squeezed Ned's arm in a gesture of reassurance. "Travel swiftly. Take a good escort for safety's sake. And if House Tully needs anything, let them know the Crown stands ready to help." Ned inclined his head in gratitude. "Your Grace." With that, their conversation turned to the day's final business. When Ned departed, Robert remained in his solar, staring at the dying embers in the fireplace. His mind wandered to the memories of the rebellion once more. Hoster Tully sending men to join their cause, forging the alliance through the marriage of Caitlin and Ned. So many alliances had been formed in that turbulent time, built on oaths and affections that now felt like they belonged to another life. And yet, the realm he held was the fruit of those bonds. For better or worse, he was the king they had helped put on the throne. He retired to his chambers late, finding them cold and empty as usual. Cersei had long since ceased sharing his bed, and Robert found himself oddly relieved by the distance. He did not remove his crown until he sank onto a chair by the hearth. In the silent glow of the fire, he turned the metal circlet in his hands, feeling the weight of it, the edges of its embossed stag heads. So much power, so much responsibility, balanced on this piece of gold. Once he had nearly let that weight crush him. Now he intended to bear it no matter the cost. With a final exhalation, he set the crown aside and reached for a simple woolen blanket, letting himself drift into a restless sleep. A week later, Ned Stark and Lady Caitlin departed for Riverrun under a small escort of loyal knights. Robert stood in the courtyard to see them off, dressed in his royal finery to honor the Tully name. Caitlin's eyes were moist, but she kept her composure, thanking Robert for allowing her husband to accompany her. Ned and Robert exchanged a final clasp of the forearm, a silent promise that they would meet again soon. As their party rode out of the Red Keep's gates, Robert felt a pang of loneliness. Ned's counsel had become a constant in his daily life. Without him, the burden of ruling felt heavier, though Robert would never admit such weakness aloud. He turned away, heading back inside with Barristan Selmy at his side. "Summon the small council," Robert said curtly. "We've got business to settle." Barristan bowed. "At once, Your Grace." The small council convened in the council chamber, a semicircular room with high windows and a large table of polished wood at its center. Grand Maester Pycelle, stooped and white-bearded, sat scribbling notes. Littlefinger lounged in his seat with that perpetual smirk. Renly, sporting a fashionable green velvet doublet, looked up from a sheaf of papers. Varys arrived last, sliding into his seat with a polite smile. The only empty chair was Ned's, which seemed to loom in Robert's peripheral vision. Robert settled at the head of the table. "Let's keep this short. Pycelle, you first. Any pressing matters of health or harvest?" Pycelle cleared his throat, the motion sending ripples through his long white beard. "The harvest in the Reach remains bountiful, Your Grace, though the southwestern coasts report some damage from recent storms. As for health, there are scattered fevers in the Riverlands, but nothing akin to a plague." "Good," Robert said. "Keep me informed if that changes." He turned to Renly next. "You've been looking into the city's finances alongside Littlefinger. Speak." Renly set aside his papers, leaning forward. "We've managed to keep the bread prices stable for now. The confiscated grain was distributed effectively. It's not a permanent solution, but it's bought time. As for taxes, the Treasury is seeing a modest increase with the new enforcement measures. Some lords complain, but we've avoided any major rebellions so far." Littlefinger chimed in, a smooth note in his voice. "We are still deeply in debt, of course, but we've slowed the hemorrhaging. The Iron Bank seems content with our new payment schedule. I'd caution against any extravagant spending for the foreseeable future, however." Robert grunted. "I have no plans for extravagance. Continue as you are, but be mindful of resentment. We don't want to push the wrong men too far." Littlefinger inclined his head, that sly smile never leaving his lips. As you command, your grace. Finally, Robert looked to Varys. Any news of significance? Rumors from the Vale, the Targaryen front, or even the Iron Islands? Varys laced his fingers together. Small whispers, your grace. The Vale remains uneasy. Lady Lisa is dealing with petty feuds among her bannermen. Most are harmless, but a few might be more dangerous if they find a unifying cause. As for the Targaryen girl, no new confirmations beyond the usual rumors. Balon Greyjoy's fleet is, as ever, a potential thorn in our side. He continues to strengthen his longships, but so far he's made no overt move to test the crown's strength. Robert nodded, tapping a finger on the table. We'll keep watching them all. If I hear one more rumor about the Targaryen girl hatching dragons, I might put my fist through a wall. He paused, glancing around. Anything else? No one spoke, so Robert dismissed them. Renly lingered a moment, a thoughtful look on his face. Once the rest had gone, he approached Robert privately. "Brother," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about your succession." Robert stiffened, his frown immediate. "Why in the seven hells would you bring that up?" Renly sighed, closing the distance to speak in a lower tone. "Because the rumors about Joffrey, they won't vanish. Cersei does little to quell them. People notice how you've distanced yourself from him. Even if he is your trueborn son, the realm doubts it." Robert felt anger coil in his gut. "So you propose what, exactly? That I name you or Stannis as heir and cast aside the boy entirely? That would guarantee war with the Lannisters." Renly held up a hand, placating. "I'm not suggesting an open move right now, but you'd be wise to consider how to control the narrative. If Joffrey is truly yours, then show him the fatherly guidance he needs. If he's not, you'd best find a discreet solution before Tywin Lannister forces a confrontation. The worst thing you can do is let the uncertainty fester." Robert rubbed his forehead. A headache threatened. "You think I don't know that? I'm trying to keep the peace. I can't just pretend I'm blind, but I can't rip the realm apart on a suspicion, either." Renly rested a hand on Robert's arm. "Just be mindful. The boy grows more willful by the day. He's not the type to respond well to fatherly discipline he never had before. If you want to shape him, you'll need to act soon." Robert stared at his younger brother, torn between frustration and gratitude. "I appreciate your concern, Renly, truly, but let me handle this in my own way." Renly nodded and withdrew. Once alone, Robert felt a mix of dread and determination settle over him. The question of Joffrey had haunted him since the boy was born. Even if he wanted to take a firmer hand with his so-called heir, how did one begin to bond with a child so full of spite and arrogance? The old Robert would have avoided the issue entirely, drowning in wine and women. The new Robert forced himself to consider a strategy. That evening, he summoned Joffrey to the courtyard, under the pretense of showing him new hawks brought by a falconer from the Stormlands. The prince arrived, clad in fine silks and an ermine-lined cloak, flanked by 2 Lannister guards. His bright blonde hair shone under the torches, and his nose wrinkled with distaste at the smell of hawks and their droppings. "Father," Joffrey said in a bored tone, barely bowing, "why did you call me here?" "I was in the middle of a game." Robert forced a patient smile. "Games can wait. I want you to see these hawks. They're from my lands in the Stormlands, strong birds of prey. You'll need such knowledge when you rule someday." Joffrey's eyes flicked dismissively to the hawk perched on the falconer's gauntlet. "I have better birds in the royal mews, do I not?" Robert stiffened. It was a small remark, but emblematic of Joffrey's attitude. Still, he pressed on. "Why don't you hold one? Learn how to handle it. You can see what makes them strong." Joffrey glanced at the falconer, then back to Robert, uncertain. "Very well," he said, stepping forward. The falconer carefully transferred the hawk to a thick leather glove for the prince. Joffrey hissed when the bird's talons gripped. He nearly jerked his hand away, but the falconer steadied him, cautioning him to move gently. Robert watched, trying not to let his exasperation show. "Stay calm. The hawk senses your fear. Show confidence." Joffrey glared, color rising in his cheeks. He seemed more irritated that the hawk challenged him than impressed by its majesty. After a moment, he thrust the glove back at the falconer. "I've seen enough," he declared, stepping away. "Is that all, father?" Robert's teeth ground together, but he forced himself to remain composed. "We're not done. I thought we might talk as well, about your lessons, your progress." Joffrey pursed his lips, clearly inconvenienced. "My mother oversees my education. I'm learning history, heraldry, the great battles." Robert's voice sharpened. "Your mother's teachings are all well and good, but you're near manhood now, and you've hardly spent time with me. As future king, you'd best learn the ways of rulership from the one who holds the throne." Joffrey's face darkened with adolescent bravado. "If you truly want me to learn to rule, then stop fussing over birds and old men's stories. Show me how to wage war properly. That's how you won the throne, isn't it?" Robert inhaled, the remark striking closer to home than Joffrey realized. He locked eyes with the boy. "War should be the last resort, not the first. Ruling is more than battles. It's about protecting our people, ensuring justice, managing alliances." Joffrey gave a short, mocking laugh. "Justice? Alliances? If I were king, I'd crush our enemies in a single stroke. That's how you did it. That's what everyone remembers. The glorious rebellion." Robert's fists clenched at his sides, but he willed himself to remain calm. "Those battles cost thousands of lives, including some good friends of mine. This realm isn't a chessboard for you to sweep clean. Boy, you talk of crushing enemies? Who are these enemies, exactly?" Joffrey shrugged, shifting his weight. "Whoever dares defy the crown. Or me. Mother says a true king doesn't tolerate insolence." Robert felt his fury rising, but also an undercurrent of sadness. Here was a child shaped by Cersei's pride and the worst Lannister arrogance. Still, he tried one last angle. "A king must also be loved by his people, Joffrey, or at least respected. Fear alone won't keep the throne. You need to understand that." The prince curled his lip. "I understand enough. If you'll excuse me, father, I have better things to do than stand around talking." Robert nearly snarled, but he caught himself. He gave a stiff nod, dismissing the boy. Joffrey stalked off, his Lannister guards trailing behind. The hawk let out a shrill cry, echoing in the courtyard after the prince departed. Robert turned to the falconer, who offered a sympathetic look, but said nothing. As Robert left the courtyard, he realized the conversation had gone as poorly as he'd feared. Joffrey was full of scorn, shaped more by Cersei's bitterness than any paternal example. Still, he resolved not to give up completely. If the boy was truly his son, and the realm believed he was, then Robert owed it to everyone to try and salvage him. But if that failed, Robert shoved the thought away. He would not ignite that tinderbox yet. Time rolled on. Winter's grip tightened. Frost clung to the windows each morning, and the breath of men and horses alike formed little clouds in the cold air. The city carried on under a subdued hush, the small folk huddling in their homes when they weren't about their business. Robert continued his kingly duties, meeting with the council, overseeing judgments, training in the yard. The absence of Ned weighed on him, but so far, nothing catastrophic required the hand's immediate return. Letters arrived from Riverrun. Hoster Tully was fading day by day, and Ned wrote that he would likely pass before spring. The old lord still recognized his daughter, but his mind often wandered to memories of his youth. Robert felt a pang of sympathy. Another tie to the rebellion was about to be severed by time. Meanwhile, Cersei maintained her distance. They exchanged only brief words at official functions. At a feast for certain visiting nobles, Robert forced a smile at her side, but she wore an expression of polite boredom, as though she found the entire affair beneath her. Tyrion Lannister, newly arrived from some sojourn to the Free Cities, watched the interplay between king and queen with knowing eyes. Robert exchanged only the barest of pleasantries with the dwarf, suspecting that the imp might be as cunning as any Lannister. Yet Tyrion at least showed a sense of humor absent in Jaime and Cersei. One afternoon, as Robert presided over the main hall to hear petitions, he found himself drifting into uneasy reflection about Joffrey's future. The line of petitioners wound through the hall, knights and small folk alike. Robert answered their concerns automatically, awarding compensations, settling disputes, commanding relief where needed. Then a thought seized him. What if the day came when Joffrey presided here, wearing the crown? The vision chilled him more than any winter wind. He forced the grim thought aside, focusing on the next petitioner, a farmer complaining about brigands near Crackclaw Point. Robert assigned a detachment of guards, then dismissed the man. But the worry lingered. Joffrey's arrogance and cruelty could tear the realm apart. Another voice in Robert's mind countered. He might not even be your son at all, which may be a blessing for the Seven Kingdoms. That night, Robert sought the solace of the training yard under moonlight. The yard was nearly empty save for a few off-duty guards. He donned a simple padded jerkin and picked up a wooden practice sword, the thick winter air biting his lungs as he exhaled clouds of steam. He took stance after stance, running through the old drills he had learned in the Vale under Jon Arryn's tutelage, long before the rebellion. Swing, pivot, thrust. Each movement anchored him in the present, his mind free of courtly intrigue for a short span. Sweat soon dampened his brow, and his muscles burned with exertion. A younger guard, noticing the king practicing alone, offered to spar. Robert accepted, and they traded blows, the crack of wood against wood echoing in the frosty air. Robert's strikes were fierce, fueled by the anxiety swirling within him. The guard was no match, though he held his own for a time. Eventually, Robert landed a decisive blow to the guard's rib cage, sending him stumbling back. Panting, Robert lowered the practice sword. He offered a hand to help the guard up, just as he did with Meryn Trant. "Well fought," he murmured. The guard thanked him, wincing. Robert felt some measure of release, though the deeper worries remained. Swinging a sword might ease tension, but it could not solve the riddle of Joffrey or the looming specter of Targaryen claims. At length, he returned to his chamber, the sweat on his skin turning cold in the night air. He washed himself quickly, then sank onto his bed, exhaustion dragging him down. In his half-sleep, he dreamed of a girl with silver hair mounted on a monstrous beast that breathed fire, and he dreamed of a boy wearing a golden crown, cackling as the realm burned. He saw the ghosts of the past. Lyanna, Rhaegar, the trident flowing red. He saw Ned, face grim, urging him to wake up. And then he was awake, gasping, the darkness of the room pressing close. Time marched forward. Reports arrived that Lord Hoster Tully had passed, with Ned Stark and Catelyn at his bedside. The funeral was held at Riverrun, with lords from surrounding lands attending. Ned wrote to inform Robert that he would stay a while longer to settle family affairs, ensuring the transition of the lordship to Edmure Tully. Robert sent condolences and reaffirmed his support for House Tully. Memories of the rebellion's early days, when House Tully's alliance was crucial, flickered through his mind. Another giant from the past had fallen. In King's Landing, winter carried on, the days short and the nights long. The city's mood was quieter than usual, but no major crises arose. Robert kept a steady course, implementing small reforms, ensuring the Gold Cloaks maintained order, and keeping tabs on the Vale, the Iron Islands, and rumors from across the Narrow Sea. If the realm was a simmering stew of tensions, at least the lid was still on. Then, one evening, a raven arrived from the Vale with unsettling tidings. Varys brought the message to Robert in the King's Solar, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Robert read the letter once, twice, his face darkening with each line. It described a covert meeting in the foothills below the Eyrie, lords suspected of harboring Targaryen sympathies, possibly receiving funds from unknown benefactors in Essos. The local knight who reported this was uncertain how large the conspiracy was, but it seemed more than idle chatter. "So it begins," Robert muttered, tossing the letter onto his desk. "They truly think the Targaryen wench will return with an army. They'll open the Vale to her if she does." Varys's voice was soft. "The messenger indicates that Lisa Arryn is not involved, at least not overtly. But she may be turning a blind eye." Robert raked a hand through his thick hair. I can't let this grow. If they're raising funds or forging alliances in the open, we must stamp it out. Shall I suggest a show of force? Varys asked delicately. A royal progress to the Vale, or an investigative force? Robert considered. A progress in winter to the mountains is risky, but letting them conspire unopposed is worse. I'll send a detachment of loyal men to the Vale, maybe led by someone I trust. Barristan, or even Ser Mandan Moore if Barristan can't be spared here. We can't appear hostile to all the Vale's lords, though. Just those who openly plot treason. Varys nodded. Discretion might serve best. These lords could scatter like mice if threatened. Robert pursed his lips. I will do it quietly, then. Gather evidence. Isolate the traitors. Punish them swiftly. He looked up at Varys. And keep me informed if you find any link to this Targaryen girl. I want to know who's funding them. The eunuch bowed. At once, Your Grace. That night, Robert wrote to Ned again, summarizing the Vale situation and expressing the need for Ned's presence if the matter escalated. He did not demand his hand's immediate return. Ned still had family obligations at Riverrun, but Robert made it clear the kingdom's stability might hang on swift action. He sealed the letter with the royal sigil and handed it to a trusted courier. Days passed, turning into a fortnight. Scouts and spies moved in and out of the Vale. Some reported no clear sign of large-scale treason, only small gatherings of disaffected knights. Others whispered that certain Vale lords had begun to quietly stockpile arms. Robert found himself on edge, remembering the early days of his rebellion, when seemingly minor alliances had ignited a full-scale war. He refused to be caught off guard. Cersei, for her part, seemed to sense the tension. She made pointed remarks at court about how easily loyalty shifts when a ruler can't maintain trust. Robert ignored her barbs. He had no time for a domestic war when the real threat lay in traitors who might welcome a Targaryen invasion. The lines were being drawn, and the Seven Kingdoms trembled on the brink of another storm. Finally, word arrived that Ned Stark was returning to King's Landing, having settled the Tully succession. Robert felt an immediate sense of relief. At least now he would have the hand he trusted by his side, a steady moral compass in a swirl of doubt. Winter still lay heavy upon the land, but Robert felt certain new challenges would not wait for the thaw. The seeds of rebellion, old grudges, and foreign threats had been planted. All he could do was prepare the realm to weather the gathering storm, standing as the solid pillar of rule he had once forsaken. On the day Ned was due to arrive, Robert made a point of being at the city gates to greet him, ignoring the council of courtiers who advised the king should wait within the Red Keep. Robert wanted to show that he stood with his hand as an equal, a friend. Accompanied by Barristan and a modest escort of gold cloaks, Robert waited in the crisp morning air, scanning the road that curved away from King's Landing. Snow dusted the surrounding fields, a rarity in the Crownlands, but a testament to the deeper cold this winter brought. At last, Ned's party appeared. A column of riders with Stark banners snapping in the wind, trimmed in black and gray. At their head rode Ned and Catelyn, both bundled against the chill. When they saw the king waiting, they quickened their pace. Ned dismounted first, bowing briefly before Robert lifted him into a fierce embrace. "Welcome home, Ned," Robert rumbled, clapping him on the back. Ned managed a thin smile, though sadness lingered in his eyes. "Thank you, Your Grace. I'm glad to be back." Catelyn curtsied, expression subdued. "The roads were harsh, but we traveled safely, thanks to the escort you provided." Robert nodded, turning to face them both. "You have my condolences again on Lord Hoster. He was a good man." Catelyn's eyes were misty. Yes, he was. "Thank you, Your Grace." They rode back to the Red Keep together, exchanging only brief conversation about the funeral. Robert noticed the weariness in Ned's posture, the lines on his face etched deeper by grief. Yet he also sensed Ned's resolve. For House Stark, for the realm. Once within the keep, servants took their horses, and Ned departed to settle Catelyn and their entourage into the quarters assigned to them. Robert let him go, deciding they would speak of the Vale and other threats when Ned had time to rest. But rest could not last long. Early the next morning, Robert summoned Ned to the council chamber. Outside, light snow began to fall on the city, frosting the rooftops. Inside, the council assembled, minus Cersei, who rarely bothered to attend these meetings now. Robert, Ned, Barristan, Renly, Littlefinger, Pycelle, and Varys took their usual seats. After formalities, Robert explained the situation in the Vale, the clandestine gatherings, the possibility of Targaryen funding. Ned's brow furrowed. We suspected small plots before, but this sounds more organized. Varys tented his fingers. Indeed, Lord Hand, our whisperers tell us a handful of lesser knights may already have pledged open support to Daenerys Targaryen, believing she will land in Westeros come spring. Littlefinger gave a dismissive sniff. They'll be old men by the time that girl sets foot here. Still, we can't ignore it. Shall we arrange for a quiet culling of the ringleaders? Ned's gaze was sharp. Murder in the dark is not the way of the North, nor should it be the way of the crown. Peter raised an eyebrow, a thin smirk on his lips. That's why we have secrets, Lord Stark, so the crown's hands stay clean. Robert intervened, his tone firm. We won't start a campaign of secret killings. If these lords conspire openly, we will face them openly. But I do want them watched closely. The moment we have proof of treason, we'll act. He turned to Ned. I'd like you to coordinate with Barristan and the Watch. Choose men you trust. We can't rely solely on shadowy methods. Ned nodded, some relief evident in his eyes. As you command. They spent the next hour discussing how to approach the problem strategically, sending loyal knights to the Vale with plausible cover, examining finances to see who might be bankrolling the conspirators, and preparing letters to Lady Lisa, encouraging her to remain vigilant against treason within her ranks. In the end, it was decided that a small contingent of crown forces would be dispatched to the Vale after the snows cleared a bit, led by a high-ranking officer known for loyalty to Robert. When the council ended, Ned lingered behind with Robert. Once they were alone, Ned's voice dropped to a more personal register. I see you still stand firm, Robert. The changes you've made here are notable. People speak of the king's justice with less cynicism now. Robert laid a hand on Ned's shoulder. I've tried, Ned. The realm might be holding together by a thread, but at least I'm not that drunken fool I was. If we can root out these plots and keep the peace a little longer, we might emerge stronger than ever. Ned nodded, though doubt flickered in his eyes. I pray you're right. Too many storms gather. The Targaryen girl is the largest threat, but the seeds of chaos are everywhere. If the realm breaks again, it will be bloodier than before. Robert squeezed Ned's shoulder. Then we won't let it break. We'll rule as we must, together, for the good of the Seven Kingdoms. In his heart, Robert knew it would not be so simple. The Lannisters were watching. The Vale smoldered with unrest, and across the sea the last Targaryen might be plotting her return with Dothraki hordes. Yet, as he looked into Ned's eyes, he felt a renewed surge of determination. If fate demanded he face war again, he would do so sober, resolute, and with the full might of the crown behind him. He had cast aside the bottle for the hammer, the throne for a cause. That cause was the realm's survival. He bid Ned farewell for the moment, stepping outside the council chamber. The Red Keep's corridors were slightly drafty, the breath of winter seeping through stone. Robert inhaled the cool air, letting it sharpen his senses. He recalled how not so long ago he dreaded each morning, preferring the oblivion of drink. Now each day brought fresh challenges but also fresh purpose. The hours to come would be filled with more tasks, letters to allies, inspections of the guard, perhaps a walk among the small folk to gauge their needs. And beyond all that lay the unknown. A Targaryen princess rumored to have dragons, rebellious lords in the mountains, a cunning queen who might betray him at any moment. But Robert Baratheon was no longer afraid. Let the storms come. He would weather them with the iron of his will, forging a legacy worthy of the crown he once nearly squandered. So he walked on through the halls, cloak sweeping the floor behind him, the stag's sigil on his breast catching the torchlight. Servants and knights bowed, murmuring, "Your Grace," and for the first time in a long while, Robert felt he deserved that title. He was their king in truth as well as in name. If he had to bleed for the realm's safety, if he had to face war or dragons or traitors within, he would do it gladly, stone-cold sober and unwavering. For that was what it meant to be the king, and at last Robert Baratheon was ready to be exactly that.